campaign and a former State Department official. So as a former State Department official, David, take on the president's comments. What did you think when you heard it?
You know, the president's comments are seemingly innocuous, but it's important to put them in context. These comments come after the U.S. passed new sanctions against Russia. Those sanctions were passed in order to punish Russia for its dark interference in our election, its attempt to manipulate our election, and its aggression in Europe and its expansionism in Europe. It's important for us to push back on both of those things. That's why it had overwhelming support in Congress from both Republicans and Democrats for these sanctions. In retaliation for these new sanctions, which are important, Russia has said it's going to expel U.S. diplomats. Instead of pushing back on that, President Trump seems to be applauding and cheering that move. That undercuts the policy behind sanctions. And it's really surprising given, for instance, the great reporting by Lucas that you just showed on the concern that our military and our members of Congress have about Russia, that Trump is the only one that can't seem to find any criticism about Russia or Putin.
So, Rebecca, how do you see it?
You know, the way I see it is the president's response just took the wind out of the sails of Vladimir Putin. In the past, every time, you know, Putin would do something against the United States, there would be this sternly worded statement saying that we object to it or we didn't like it. But it didn't really have an effect other than to be gratifying to Moscow. But here we have the president saying, you know what, fine. He's sort of it looked to me like he was being tongue-in-cheek, but he just wasn't giving that to Russia. Fine, take it, we're cutting staff. And then the second point is, has the effect of doing something the president likes to do, which is sort of, you know, poking at the people who think that there's this narrative to be had about the president collaborating with or colluding with the Russians, which I think is just silly at this point. And he's, you know, so the sanctions are having an effect. That's what we should care about. It doesn't undercut the policy. The sanctions are in place. The president's just not going to go tit for tat with the Russians, and I think that's good.
The former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, doesn't think much of the president's response. Here's what he wrote in a tweet. He says that real Donald Trump praised Putin today for cutting 755 people from our embassy in Russia shows that he doesn't understand diplomacy. And then in a second tweet, imagine wanting to know less about Russia's military modernization. That's what Trump praised today. Is it the case that by losing these diplomats, we're actually losing spy services, Rebecca?
Of course not. I think that, you know, this is several hundred employees, many of them Russian, a lot of them working on, you know, not spying. They're there to just help the embassies. But again, I think that's an overstatement. It's hyperbole. And I certainly wish these former Obama officials and people who work for the State Department would show some ire and frustration with Russia and not the president as he tries to deal with this. You know, we've got a lot of crises going along across the planet. He can't have hot spots everywhere in terms of the rhetoric that he gives back. We're dealing with North Korea right now. If we can defuse the situation with Russia, if he can just sort of laugh this off and move on while these sanctions are still tough and in place, I think that that is a smart policy. And I like that the president isn't sticking with, you know, these approved talking points like every other president has in the past. He's just responding the way that he thinks is best, and I think that's also speaks well of the president.
David, he seems to be saying, you know, it's water off our backs. If you want to get rid of those diplomats, fine. Is there perhaps some value in that approach?
You know, Rebecca seems able to spin any comment by President Trump, no matter how aberrant, as being okay. It's not okay. As the former U.S. ambassador to Russia pointed out, this hurts our ability to monitor Russia, to monitor an adversary that's doing things that are provocative towards the U.S. and are hurting U.S. interests. And President Trump needs to be a commander-in-chief. He needs to step up and push back against Russia. He seems utterly incapable of doing that. This is not a joke. Russia has invaded Ukraine. Russia is moving troops into Belarus along the border with several of our other allies. It intends to expand in Europe, and we need to push back. We shouldn't be undercutting sanctions that have just been put in place. We need to strengthen those sanctions. We need to follow up with rhetoric, and we need to push back on Russia. And President Trump seems utterly incapable of doing that, and you can't spin that as a positive
David,
in any way.
How would you have responded?
I would have responded that this is improper, that it is not a okay response to what we are doing, that Russia should change its actions as a result of our sanctions and take the sanctions seriously, but it shouldn't retaliate against us when we have every right to do that. Russia should apologize for trying to interfere in our election. It should assure us that it's not going to interfere in our election again. It should pull back its troops from Belarus, where it's doing military maneuvers that are provocative. It should ensure the people of Europe that it intends to respect the sovereignty of countries like Ukraine and like our other NATO allies. And that's what we should be pushing for.
Let me give Rebecca a chance to give her response. What would you have said?
Yeah, I would just say if those several hundred people are there to stop Russia from doing all of this, then why did Russia invade Ukraine? Why did Russia violate the INF Treaty? Why did Russia continue to conduct nuclear war games against the United States? All of this on President Obama's watch while those 700 supposedly, earth-shattering diplomatic staff were there. Listen, we're in the middle of some really high-stakes stuff right now across, the globe, and I think President Trump handled the situation perfectly. He didn't give Vladimir Putin the satisfaction. Moving on.
All right, Rebecca Heinrichs and David Tafuri, good discussion. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Paul.